This is why you never put humans on a leash. Those were the words Captain Threlix muttered as he surveyed the aftermath of the station's battle arena. Smoke curled lazily from shattered beams, the scent of scorched metal and singed alien flesh heavy in the air. Around him, the gathered representatives of the Galactic Concord stared in a stunned silence. At the center of it all stood Corporal Dax Halstead, a bloodied, grinning human in torn combat fatigues. "Shall we call that a draw?" Dax said, chest heaving, the human's absurd humor diffusing none of the tension. His opponent, a hulking Vrazkin enforcer twice his size, lay sprawled unconscious several feet away, one tusk missing and what looked suspiciously like a shattered knee joint. The incident began as most interspecies misunderstandings do: overconfidence. The Vrazkin, proud and belligerent as ever, had issued an open challenge to the Concord's diplomats and their entourages. "Prove your species' worth," the enforcer roared, "or sit in your seats meek and silent while the strong decide your fate." Humans, relatively new to the Concord, had so far managed to remain quiet at such provocations. That restraint had been tested. Veteran Concord members whispered about how humans had a peculiar tolerance for insults right up until they didn't. Dax, assigned to the diplomatic escort detail for this delegation, had been leaning against a bulkhead, arms crossed, seemingly ignoring the Vrazkin's boasts. It was the Vrazkin's smug declaration, "Humans trained for nothing, soft creatures, bred for subservience," that changed everything. Dax, breaking his silence, asked a single question. "You offering, or are you just barking?" The Vrazkin's laughter shook the room. "I accept, but remember, I do not hold back. You may withdraw before the first strike and keep your dignity. What's left of it?" The diplomats, alien and human alike, attempted to de-escalate. The Vrazkin, uninterested, demanded the duel proceed. The humans' efforts to avoid conflict evaporated when Dax turned to his commanding officer and asked permission. "Sir, with all due respect, I'd like to demonstrate why we train." To the human's surprise, Captain Threlix gave a curt nod. The captain was no stranger to Dax's record. A mix of commendations, reprimands, and tales of survival against impossible odds. "Make it clean," Threlix said. Moments later, the combat arena was lit, its holographic barriers shimmering into place. Aliens from dozens of species filled the observation platforms, eager to witness the supposed humiliation of humanity's representative. Wagers were placed at lightning speed. None favored the human. The Vrazkin started the bout with a thunderous charge, a blur of muscle and teeth that sent vibrations rippling through the floor. Dax sidestepped with infuriating ease, delivering a quick jab to the Vrazkin's ribs. The audience laughed, thinking it a meaningless gesture, until the Vrazkin snarled in pain and stumbled back. "Didn't expect that," Dax remarked, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet. "Guess you didn't read the briefing on kinetic absorption training." What followed wasn't a fight, it was an education. Every species in the arena learned something new about humans that day, why they trained so young, and why most Concord veterans treated them with wary respect. Humans didn't just train their bodies to endure, they trained their minds to adapt under pressure. Dax exploited openings the Vrazkin didn't realize it had. Every strike seemed calculated, each evasion designed to lure the opponent into overextending. The human was relentless, darting in and out like a predator, testing its prey's limits. When the Vrazkin attempted to pin him, Dax slipped free with movements that seemed impossibly fast for his size. When the Vrazkin swung its massive arms in frustration, Dax countered with precision strikes to vulnerable joints. "Is this your best?" Dax taunted between breaths. "Come on, you're embarrassing yourself." The crowd's mood shifted from amusement to unease. What had started as a spectacle was becoming something else. The Vrazkin, panting and battered, finally managed to land a glancing blow, sending Dax skidding across the floor. The human rose almost immediately, wiping blood from his lip and grinning like someone who just found the fun part of a game. "Good hit," Dax said. "Let me return the favor." The Vrazkin didn't see the first strike, a vicious hook to the side of its head that sent it staggering. The second was a leg sweep that toppled the giant. Before the Vrazkin could recover, Dax had it in a chokehold that should have been impossible given the size disparity. The Vrazkin clawed at Dax's arms but couldn't break free. When its struggles ceased, Dax stood, victorious and utterly unfazed. The silence in the arena was deafening. Even the bookmakers had stopped updating their odds, their appendages frozen in disbelief. Humans weren't supposed to win, certainly not against the strongest the Vrazkin had to offer. Yet here was a lone human, battered but triumphant, as if the outcome had been preordained. Captain Threlix broke the silence. "You've made your point, Corporal. Stand down." Dax gave a sharp salute, limping off the platform to join his team. "Hope that cleared up any misunderstandings," he said, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd parted as he walked, giving him a wide berth. Later, in the quiet of the debriefing room, the human delegation gathered. Dax, now patched up and leaning against a wall, shrugged off the diplomat's scolding. "They needed a reminder," Dax said simply. "We're not here because we're soft. We're here because we're trained, from day one." Captain Threlix's expression was unreadable. "You realize the reports from this will ripple across the Concord." "Good," Dax said. "Maybe next time, they'll think twice before calling us soft." The Galactic Concord meeting resumed the next day, but the atmosphere in the chamber was nothing like before. The casual arrogance displayed by many of the representatives had been replaced by a cautious, almost subdued energy. No one mentioned the duel outright, but its implications hung over the proceedings like a heavy cloud. For decades, humans had been viewed as a second-tier species, useful for logistical support or negotiations, but hardly a force to be reckoned with in combat. That illusion had been shattered. Captain Threlix and his delegation took their seats without fanfare. Dax Halstead, though technically not part of the official proceedings, had been granted a special observer's role. His presence, while informal, was anything but unnoticed. Every time Dax shifted in his seat, the eyes of half the chamber flicked toward him, as if expecting some sudden outburst of violence. Dax, for his part, found it amusing, but didn't let it show. The meeting's agenda moved forward with painful slowness. Representatives debated trade routes, border disputes, and resource allocations. But the undercurrent of tension remained. It was clear that the human delegation's stock had risen overnight, but how far that rise would go was uncertain. As the Concord representatives argued over the finer points of an agricultural pact, Dax leaned over to Threlix. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" he asked in a low voice. Threlix gave a slight nod. "Go ahead." "They're stalling," Dax said. "No one wants to talk about the real issue. They're scared of us now, and they don't know how to deal with it." Threlix's eyes scanned the room. The normally boisterous Vrazkin representatives were uncharacteristically quiet, their usual bombastic rhetoric replaced by terse, cautious statements. Even the more diplomatic species, like the Pharynx and the Aretin, seemed on edge. "Let them stall," Threlix said. "Every minute they spend second-guessing is a minute we gain. Besides, we don't need to push anything. They'll come to us." Dax raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He had learned to trust Threlix's instincts over the years, even when the captain's approach seemed counterintuitive. By midday, the meeting had devolved into a tedious back-and-forth over mineral rights in a contested star system. Dax was beginning to tune out when a sharp chime echoed through the chamber. The sound signaled the arrival of a new representative. Heads turned toward the entrance as a towering figure entered the room, flanked by two smaller aides. It was Jorlin Drakthar, High Warlord of the Vrazkin clans. The Vrazkin leader's sudden appearance caused an audible stir. Drakthar rarely attended Concord meetings in person, preferring to delegate such matters to his underlings. His presence was a statement in itself. As he strode to his seat, his gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on the human delegation. When his eyes met Dax's, a flicker of recognition passed across his face, followed by what could almost be described as a grin. The meeting facilitator, a meticulous Oratin named Gareth Corell, cleared his throat nervously. "High Warlord Drakthar, your presence here is unexpected but welcome. May we assume you have urgent matters to address?" Drakthar's voice was a deep rumble, loud enough to command attention without effort. "Indeed, facilitator, I have come to speak of strength and its place within this Concord." The chamber fell silent. Drakthar's reputation as a warrior and tactician was unmatched, and his words carried weight far beyond his own species. He turned his gaze toward the human delegation. "Yesterday, one of your kind demonstrated a truth that many here have forgotten, he said. Strength is not merely a matter of size or numbers. It is discipline, strategy, and the will to endure. The human known as Halstead proved this with his actions. Dax felt a dozen pairs of eyes on him, but he remained still, his expression neutral. Drakthar continued. For years, the Concord has treated humanity as a junior partner, valuable only for its diplomacy and logistical support. I see now that this was a mistake. You have warriors among you, warriors who train as if every day might bring war. This is a lesson my people respect. Drakthar's words sent a ripple of shock through the room. The Vraskin were infamous for their disdain of perceived weakness, and their grudging respect was not easily earned. The High Warlord's acknowledgement of human strength was unprecedented. What do you propose, High Warlord? Gareth Kurel asked cautiously. Drakthar's grin widened. I propose an alliance. Let the Vraskin and the humans share their knowledge of combat and strategy. Together we will be stronger than any enemy that dares challenge the Concord. The chamber erupted into murmurs and exclamations. Some representatives looked intrigued, others alarmed. Captain Threlix remained impassive, but Dax could see the gears turning in his mind. An alliance with the Vraskin? One of the Pharynx delegates said. Surely this is premature. Humanity's role within the Concord has not been fully established. On the contrary, Drakthar said, they have proven themselves more than capable. Or would you challenge my assessment? The Pharynx delegate recoiled slightly, unwilling to press the issue further. Drakthar's challenge was not one to be taken lightly. Threlix finally spoke. High Warlord, while we appreciate your recognition, any alliance must be carefully considered. Humanity values its independence, even as part of the Concord. We would need assurances that such a partnership would be mutually beneficial. Drakthar nodded. Spoken like a true tactician, let us discuss these assurances then. Perhaps we begin with a demonstration, a joint exercise between our forces. Let the galaxy see what our combined strength looks like. The suggestion hung in the air, tempting and dangerous. Threlix glanced at Dax, who gave a subtle shrug as if to say, your call. We'll consider it, Threlix said carefully, but for now the human delegation must consult with its leaders before making any commitments. Drakthar inclined his head. Of course, I await your decision. But know this, the galaxy has changed. Those who fail to adapt will not survive what comes next. As the meeting adjourned for the day, Dax leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. The duel had been a gamble, but it had paid off in ways he hadn't anticipated. Now humanity stood at a crossroads, and the choices made in the coming days would shape its future in the Concord. The stakes had never been higher. As the delegation left the chamber that evening, the weight of the day's events hung heavy. Captain Threlix walked ahead, his usual steady stride revealing no hint of the whirlwind of decisions ahead. Behind him, Dax Halstead trailed with a relaxed demeanor that belied his own unease. He knew this was bigger than the duel, bigger than him. Humanity was on the cusp of redefining its place in the galaxy. Back in their temporary quarters aboard the Concord station, Threlix convened the delegation. The room was stark and functional, illuminated by the faint hum of the station's artificial lighting. Threlix stood at the head of the table, hands clasped behind his back. Let's hear it, he said. Thoughts on Drakthar's proposal? The first to speak was Ambassador Kane, a measured and diplomatic voice who often smoothed the rougher edges of human interactions with the conquered. The proposal is tempting, Kane said. An alliance with the Vraskin would elevate humanity's status instantly. Their military might and strategic influence are unparalleled. But, Threlix prompted. Kane sighed. But their methods are brutal. Aligning with them risks painting us with the same brush. We've worked hard to present ourselves as a species of balance, capable of strength but committed to diplomacy. This could undo that. Dax leaned forward, his chair creaking under the movement. With respect, Ambassador, I think we're underestimating what we bring to the table. Drakthar doesn't want us for our numbers or ships. He wants us for our training. He's seen what we're capable of, and he knows it's different from anything the galaxy's used to. The room fell silent. Dax's words carried weight, not just because of his role in recent events, but because he spoke a truth they all felt. Humanity's training was more than preparation. It was identity. From childhood, humans learned to adapt, to overcome, to think critically under pressure. That resilience had been born of centuries of struggle on Earth, a crucible that forged them into something the galaxy had not anticipated. "You're not wrong," Trellick said, "but we can't ignore the risks. An alliance with the Vrazkin could draw us into conflicts we're not ready for. And the rest of the Concord, they're already uneasy. This could isolate us further." A junior officer, Lieutenant Harlow, spoke up hesitantly. "Sir, maybe isolation isn't a bad thing. If the Concord's members are only just now recognizing our value, maybe it's time we stop trying to fit into their mold and start carving our own path." Trellick nodded slowly, considering the point. "It's a valid perspective, but we need to be strategic. Drakthar's watching us closely, and he's not the only one. If we overplay our hand, we could turn allies into adversaries." The discussion stretched late into the night. Arguments for and against the alliance were weighed meticulously. By the end, a consensus emerged. They would agree to the joint exercises, but on their own terms. Humanity would demonstrate its strength, but remain cautious about deeper commitments. It was a compromise, one that left room to maneuver in the uncertain days ahead. The next morning, the human delegation delivered their response. Drakthar received it with a sharp-toothed grin that revealed nothing. The Concord's representatives, however, were less subtle. Some openly questioned humanity's intentions, while others watched with newfound respect. The joint exercises were scheduled within a week. A barren moon on the edge of Concord space was chosen as the site, its surface equipped with holographic projectors and environmental controls to simulate various combat scenarios. The Vrazkin arrived in force, their warships casting long shadows over the rocky terrain. Humanity's contingent, while smaller, was no less prepared. Dax stood among them, ready for the next challenge. The first scenario was a straightforward skirmish. Vrazkin warriors clashed with human soldiers in a chaotic melee. The Vrazkin relied on brute strength and overwhelming force, their roars echoing across the battlefield. The humans, by contrast, moved with calculated precision. Small units coordinated seamlessly, exploiting every weakness with tactics honed through years of rigorous training. The result was clear. While the Vrazkin dominated in raw power, the humans outmaneuvered them at every turn. The second scenario tested adaptability. A simulated environmental disaster struck the battlefield, forcing both sides to contend with collapsing terrain and sudden storms. Here, humanity's edge became even more apparent. While the Vrazkins struggled to adjust their strategies, the humans thrived. They navigated the chaos with practiced ease, their flexibility turning obstacles into opportunities. By the end of the exercises, the verdict was undeniable. Humanity's training was more than a match for the galaxy's mightiest warriors. Drakthar himself approached Captain Trellick as the exercises concluded, his respect unmistakable. "Your people have proven themselves," Drakthar said. "I look forward to what we can achieve together." "As do we," Trellick replied diplomatically. "But let's take it one step at a time." As the Vrazkin departed, the humans gathered for a quiet moment of reflection. The path ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. They had earned their place in the galaxy not through words, but through action. The lessons they'd learned from the moment they could walk, to adapt, to endure, to think beyond the immediate, had become their greatest strength. Later, aboard their ship, Dax sat with Trellick in the command center. The captain's usual stoic expression softened slightly as he looked out at the stars. "You did well, Dax," Trellick said. "Better than I expected." Dax grinned. "Coming from you, that's high praise." Trellick's gaze remained fixed on the void. "This isn't the end, you know. It's just the beginning. There's a lot we don't know about what's out there. But if we keep doing what we do best, training, adapting, we'll be ready for whatever comes." Dax nodded, the weight of the moment sinking in. Humanity had taken its first steps into a larger, more dangerous galaxy. But for the first time, they weren't just surviving, they were thriving. And it all came down to one simple truth. They trained for this.